We begin with a major development at the 29th Annual UN Climate Change Conference. A $300 billion deal a year has been reached to help developing countries curb climate change. The funds are intended to support developing countries as they gradually wean themselves off coal, oil, and gas and pay for damage caused by extreme weather. World Resources Institute President Annie Gupta said the deal will help the world achieve a safer and more equitable future. Let's now invite Paul Beckwith. He is a climate system scientist joining us from Ottawa. Paul, good evening and thanks for your time on CTV News Channel.
Well, thank you for having me.
And before I start with my first question, I'd like to mention you were already there at the COP a few days ago. So let me ask you about this deal that is in place now. After many concessions, many frustrations from developing nations, they have reached out with this deal of $300 billion. What's your takeaway from this deal?
Well, the first thing is that, the COP runs from November 11th through the 22nd with one day off. So it's 11 days of negotiation. And almost invariably, it comes down to the wire. It comes down to the last day or the second last day. And often it runs into overtime like this one did. So the announcement of this $300 billion just came just about an hour and a half ago, which was about 6:30 Eastern Standard Time, and that's 3:30 a.m. in Baku. So the negotiators were basically stuck in rooms, and you had the president of COP telling them, you got to come up with some deal. We want to pull apart the venue. The conference is over. I mean, that's sort of my take. I mean, it's not enough. The developed countries were asking for 1.3 trillion. It is more than the previous 100 billion, which was promised in 2009.
Right. But how do you bridge a gap when the ask is $1.3 trillion and what they've agreed upon is $300 billion? I mean, the margin is very wide, as we understand. So how is this money to be used, distributed? How do you think the nations are going to cope with it?
Well, I think the first thing is that the nations didn't come up with 100 billion. They promised that in 2009. They only came up with about a third of that. And now this conference are saying 300. So, I thought the number would be agreed at somewhere between 100 billion and 1.3 trillion, maybe 500 billion or something. But, okay, it's 300. As long as the nations stand by their pledges, that's going to be a big improvement because they never met the 100 billion that they pledged before is the first thing. And the money, as you said, is getting used to try to wean these developing countries off fossil fuels, to allow them to adapt to the extreme weather events that are occurring and pay for some of those damages. But put it in context, okay? Because one storm in the U.S. recently, Hurricane Helene, caused about 300 billion or 350 billion U.S. in damages. So that puts the number into perspective.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good perspective to have. But let me talk about the other development as well, since you also mentioned it's a long ongoing conference. The other big development is, of course, the carbon trading markets, something that has been discussed for about a decade or so. How does this work and what is this all about?
Yeah, so people refer to it, policymakers, as Article 6, adoption of Article 6. That doesn't mean anything to anybody else, right, who doesn't know. But basically what they're doing is they're trying to create markets. They want the UN to create a market to trade carbon, and to they think that would raise funds. That would probably raise an estimated $250 billion a year. So that would be on top of the $300 billion a year. And that by trade, a country that couldn't avoid reducing fossil fuels, couldn't cut out their fossil fuels, could actually buy the credits, pay money to buy the credits to allow them to do it. And that would mean another country wouldn't be able to do it. So it's trying to create sort of a market. We know that these markets do actually work fairly well if they're regulated. And that's what they're hoping the UN does with this. So this was also agreed upon at this COP as well.
Okay, I have little time, but I want to ask you this question. In your understanding, you were there at the COP. How much of the conversation was about Donald Trump coming back to the White House and the future of COP? Briefly, please.
Yes, well, people, of course, are concerned, but I mean, Donald Trump came into power in 2016, and that was also when a COP was going on, and it was pretty grim at that point. This one, I think people are just getting on with what climate change is doing. People are talking about having more action taken by states and by cities, and other governments around the world are just going to continue what they're doing as if as if Trump didn't matter. I mean, I'll just give one example. Like solar power is the rate of solar power usage for electrical generation is doubling every 3 years. So in 3 years it's double, in 6 years it's 4 times, in 8 years it's 8 times. That's a huge momentum. It's for good economic reasons. It's not for climate change. It just makes sense to do that. Same with batteries, same with electric cars. Really good economic choices. So Trump isn't going to be able to stop that sort of thing. And he'll damage the U.S.
Paul, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, running completely out of time here, but appreciate you joining us. But thank you for all those very important insights indeed. Of course, the conversation will keep going on. Paul Beckwith, a climate system scientist, appreciate your time. Thank you.